In our previous video, we discussed the rise of the 3rd dynasty of Ur and its collapse at the hands of Amorite invaders from the west. The subsequent period of political fragmentation was one of regional conflict, with the Amorite Shamshi-Adad and his dynasty ruling in the north, while the Eshnunna dominated central Mesopotamia and Larsa reigned over the south. Many names from this period are a mystery to the general public, but that of Babylon is a notable exception. Under one of its most famous kings, Hammurabi, this new entity would rise to unify the entire region in a new empire, eclipsing the previous civilizations to the point where Sumer and Akkad were simply known as Babylonia. Welcome to our video on the rise of Babylon. The settlement that would become Babylon, known as Babar at the time, was possibly inhabited as a minor and unimportant town as soon as the early dynastic period, from 2900 to 2350 BC. Its ruler styled himself as the builder of a temple dedicated to the god Marduk, the patron of the future illustrious city. The first definite mention of Babylon in historical sources occurs during the reign of Akkadian king Shar-Kali-Shari, during which he laid the foundations of a temple in the city. Later, during the 3rd dynasty of Ur, King Shulgi reorganized the lands of Sumer and Akkad into 20 provinces, each governed by a local ensi. This, and the wider bureaucratic control exerted by the 3rd Ur dynasty kings, led to profound long-term changes in the region, which would eventually result in it becoming the capital of one of the core provinces in the Neo-Sumerian Empire. It was also governed by an ensi, which could have been hereditary in certain situations. Iter-Elam, his son Isser-Elam, and Abba were all part of the same family, which indicates the presence of native local rulers in Babylon. In the late 21st century BC, increasing numbers of Amorite pastoralists began to migrate east and make their homes in the settled civilizations of Mesopotamia. This wave of migration played a key role in the fall of Ur, and in the political fragmentation that followed. An Amorite chief known as Sumu-Abum usurped the kingship and established the first Babylonian dynasty in 1894 BC. His successor, Sumu-La'el, took power in 1880 BC and expanded his kingdom even further to cover an area from Sippar in the north to Marad in the south, encompassing many prominent old cities such as Kish, whose walls he demolished in order to consolidate Babylonian hegemony. During his reign, the first indisputable evidence for the cult of Marduk was also documented, when during 1860 BC, a throne of gold and silver was fashioned for the Babylonian sky god in the city. 3 future kings, Sabium, Apel-Sin, and Sin-Muballit, reigned over the subsequent half-century of relative stability. Before we discuss Hammurabi himself, we must first speak of the broader political situation in Sumer and Akkad into which he would emerge. We covered the exploits of the northern Amorite kingdoms in our previous video, however the Sumerian south was also a battleground. As the 3rd Ur dynasty weakened, an official named Ishbi-Erra, who served the final Ur king Ibi-Sin, betrayed his master and established his own power base at Isin. After the Elamites sacked Ur in 2002 BC, it was he who recaptured it and expelled the foreign Elamites from the region. For this, his opportunistically created Isin dynasty earned the official endorsement of the Nippur priesthood as the 3rd Ur dynasty's heirs. For upwards of half a century, this clan possessed hegemony over Sumer and Akkad. However, its fortunes would begin to change with the emergence of yet another Amorite leader named Gungunum, who reigned from 1932 to 1906 BC. He seems to have been the governor of Larsa, city of the Mesopotamian sun god Utu, during Isin rule. This governor revolted against his native rulers and eventually captured the former royal capital of Ur, gaining himself a massive ideological and financial victory. Therefore, by the middle of the 19th century BC, it was Babylon and Larsa which constituted the rising powers in Sumer and Akkad. In fact, they had already clashed in a series of small engagements, with the Babylonian kings using diplomatic marriages with the tribally related 6th Uruk dynasty as a buffer against the powerful Larsa in the south. After a short period of internal strife, a dynasty of Amorites from east of the Tigris under Kudur-Mabuk took Larsa and deposed Gungunum's descendant in 1834 BC. Rather than ruling the realm himself, he would take a ceremonial position as father of the Amorite country and appointed his eldest son Warad Sin to rule in his name, in a similar manner to Shamshi-Adad's earlier trimorphic empire. In 1822 BC, Rim Sin succeeded his older brother and would begin a crusade to expand his own kingdom. This lesser-known ruler became so powerful that he defeated a coalition of Uruk, Isin, Sutium, Rapikam and Babylon under Hammurabi's father in 1810 BC. 8 years later, in 1802 BC, he captured Uruk and ended the dynasty ruled by Babylon's allies. By the end of the 19th century BC, control of the prosperous city of Ur and the Persian Gulf trade routes granted Larsa a sudden period of prosperity, which can be seen in the remnants of large private houses in the city throughout this period. Finally, in 1794 BC, Rim Sin extinguished the remnants of the Isin dynasty and annexed their territory, an event which was so important to the kings of Larsa that every year after it was named in its honor. By the time Hammurabi's father, Sin Muballit, perished in 1793, Larsa controlled all of Sumer and wielded significant power. The next year, 1792 BC, saw Hammurabi finally ascend to the throne of Babylon at the age of 18. He inherited a rising state. His ancestors had gradually conquered cities such as Borsippa, Kish and Sippar. Despite this, Babylon was still far from the most important of the many realms in the region when Hammurabi took power. The expansionist Eshnunna occupied Babylon's northeastern border, the aforementioned powerful state of Larsa under Rim Sin was to their south, and the foreign nation of Elam was to the east. At the same time, the main power in the region was the Upper Mesopotamian kingdom under Shamshi-Adad, which often cooperated with the new, apparently subservient Babylonian king. The monarchs often performed small favors for one another, such as sheltering persecuted diplomats or extraditing criminals who escaped to the other's territory. While this alliance of sorts had its benefits, the presence of Shamshi-Adad to the north hemmed Hammurabi in and prevented any kind of Babylonian expansion for many years. Instead, the king focused on being a magnanimous and generous monarch in the mold of Gudea from centuries earlier. Pleasing the god Inanna, otherwise known as Ishtar in Akkadian, by commissioning a throne of gold, silver, precious stones and lapis lazuli was a noted achievement, as well as establishing justice in the land, that is, cancelling all debts which citizens would often accumulate. This establishment of justice had the secondary effect of rendering the debtors loyal to him rather than their wealthy creditors. For 28 years, Hammurabi focused on the internal development of his city, reorganizing many aspects of the economy and carrying out the aforementioned kingly tasks. However, a conflict would soon be ignited, which would eventually propel Babylon to never-before-seen heights in Mesopotamia. By this time, Shamshi-Adad's empire had fallen, and Zimri-Lim of Mari had usurped his incompetent younger son, Yasma-Adad, from his co-royal capital. In early 1767, the supreme king of Elam, the Sukol-Ma Siwe-Pala Hupak, made an alliance with Zimri-Lim. Their common ground centered around the expansionist state of Eshnunna. It blocked Elamite expansion into Mesopotamia, and also meddled in the affairs of Mari's sphere of influence, so they allied against it, sealing their alliance with an exchange of gold, silver and wine from Mari and tin from Elam, which was a key resource in the production of bronze. In late 1766 BC, the alliance attacked Eshnunna, and while the details are vague, it is clear that the king of the city disappeared and the local king of Susa, the Sukal, instead took up occasional residence in the city. From there he would impose direct rule upon the cities of Mesopotamia under the Elamites, a practice which they had not taken part in before, instead preferring to raid and loot the wealthy Euphrates-Tigris basin. The Elamite occupiers now schemed further, embarking on a dangerous diplomatic gamble. They contacted both Hammurabi of Babylon and Rim-Sin of Larsa, commanding both rulers to provide troops with which to attack the other. Unfortunately for the foreign Elamites, the two rulers apparently compared notes, perhaps motivated by their common Mesopotamian culture, and realized the attempted foreign duplicity, resulting in both of these realms exchanging diplomats and joining forces. In early 1765 BC, events occurred on two fronts, both north and south. In the north, the Elamites sent several proxy armies, with troops from Elam, Eshnunna, and mercenaries from the Zagros Mountains, to assault northern Mesopotamia, commanded by client kings of Elam in the north. This maneuver led to a few years of back-and-forth conflict, during which the Suqal-Ma ruined his previously established alliance with Mari. Meanwhile, to the south, Hammurabi reacted decisively to a threat from the king of Susa, who coveted Babylon itself and intended to seize it. Calling upon the many cities and kingdoms of the region, Hammurabi managed to head a grand alliance of Mesopotamia, including Yamhad, Ekalatum, and most of the Akkadian city-states. Most prominent was Zimri-Lin of Mari, who sealed a pact with the Babylonians in the middle of 1765 BC, which included the words, "From this day on, for as long as I live, I will be at war with Siwe-Pala-Hupak." The Mari king's subsequent active levying of both urban and nomadic troops for Hammurabi can be understood due to Elamite intervention in northern Mesopotamia. It is likely he saw Babylon as a dagger with which to stab the foreign invaders. In gratitude for this generous assistance, Hammurabi granted monetary rewards to the soldiers even before they fought, and invited all of them to feast in his presence in order to make them feel welcome in the foreign land. Notably absent from the anti-Elam alliance was Larsa, who remained neutral. The first move was made by Suqal-Kudu-Zalush, king of Susa, who advanced into Babylonian lands and put the city of Upi under siege. This assault pushed Hammurabi to conscript even the merchants into the military, who were usually exempt due to their valued profession. He also sent repeated envoys to Rim-Sin of Larsa asking for help, but was met with stony silence as the only response. Initially, the Babylonian garrison in the city resisted the foreign invaders, but eventually they boarded ships and fled after waiting so long that they realized the city would not be relieved. After capturing Upi, the Elamites did not advance further west and instead withdrew to Eshnunna. At the start of the campaigning season in 1764 BC, the Elamites returned, crossing the Tigris at Mankesum and besieging the city of Hiratum with 30,000 men, assault ramps, and other siege engines. However, this attempt was undermined by the inhabitants of the city, who opened the irrigation canals around the city, washing the siege weaponry away. At the same time, an allied army under a Mari general attacked the invading army from behind and relieved Hiratum. As these defensive actions were conducted, allied offensives were also underway. Hammurabi sent multiple raiding forces to outflank and pillage the countryside of Eshnunna, setting fire to their fields and stealing cattle. These defeats, constant Babylonian pressure, possibly disloyal allied Eshnunna officers, and internal dissent all caused the Elamites to retreat to their own lands. Hammurabi had used his diplomatic prowess to rally an alliance to his side and repel a dangerous enemy, and now he had a free hand to pursue further plans in the region. During the war against Elam, Rim-Sin had remained neutral, ignoring Hammurabi's repeated requests for assistance despite their alliance. This irritated the Babylonian, who now wanted revenge against his main competitor. Finally, in 1763 BC, Hammurabi declared war on Rim-Sin, justifying it as a preemptive act authorized by the gods. he still had Mari's crucial support, and besieged and captured Mashkan Shapir relatively quickly, followed by Nippur and Isin during the middle of 1763 BC, after which he advanced on Lhasa. After a 6-month siege, the inhabitants of Lhasa ran out of food, and Hammurabi tore down the city walls, but did not raze the city. Rim Sin initially escaped, but was soon captured and killed. The Babylonian king then cancelled debts in the newly captured city, as he had in his capital. The fundamental political makeup of Sumer and Akkad had now changed forever. City-states were no longer the standard unit of the region, replaced by Babylonia, which would continuously form into a large territorial state from this point forward. However, Hammurabi's empire still had not reached its zenith, and its achievements, which we shall discuss in our next video, secured its place in history.